IGN recently sat down with Nintendo of America president Doug Bowser to ask the tough questions. Wait, no, it was a puff piece with almost no mention of the anti-consumer practices that have plagued Nintendo's decisions for more than a decade. So, most of the interview is about the opening of Nintendo's new store in San Francisco, so we'll be skipping that. I just want to focus on the few times IGN gets close to a real question. Quote, "The tariff situation is constantly changing in the United States, and with all this uncertainty, I think that some consumers are worried that if they can't find one at launch, the price will have gone up in 6 months or a year when they do find one. So I'm wondering, to what extent can you commit to Switch 2's $450 price tag for both launch and beyond?" Notice that the question isn't something like, how do you justify price equivalent to the PS5 and Series X with drastically inferior hardware? No, it's simply whether we can count on getting one at $450. IGN's really looking out for consumers. And of course, when IGN does mention price, they have to couch it in terms of tariffs, despite the fact that Nintendo has been perfectly clear that the price increases have absolutely nothing to do with tariffs. Initially, it was constant speculation and even outright misinformation from journalists that the price had been impacted by Trump's tariffs. And when neither of those panned out, they turned to a fear that tariffs might impact the price in the future. Whether you love or hate Trump's tariffs, and I'm not a big fan myself, the tariffs aren't to blame for Nintendo's price increases. The issue here is journalists wanting an own on Trump more than they want reasonably priced products for consumers. They would love nothing more than a price increase directly related to tariffs. Then they could LARP as pro-consumer while they write a million articles about how the right wing ruined gaming. They'd rather blame Trump for price hikes than Nintendo, the people actually responsible for them. Because let's be honest, gaming journalism is filled with failed political writers masquerading as gamers. Next, IGN blows smoke up Bowser's ass before finally asking something like a real question. Sorta. Quote, "And you're right. You mentioned earlier that the pre-orders showed how high demand is for Switch 2, and that's been a very positive story for you guys over the last couple of weeks. But prior to that, about a month ago, I think undoubtedly one of the biggest talking points following the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct was some backlash over the software pricing. Specifically, Mario Kart World costing $79.99, a price that did not change coming back after the pre-order delay. Internally, were you all expecting that level of backlash over the price? What were those conversations like?" So finally, IGN touches on $80 games. But look at the way they do so. They don't ask for a justification for the price increase. They don't ask why Nintendo would need to raise prices when they were still making good margins at $70. They don't ask what percentage of games they expect will cost $80. They don't ask whether Nintendo considered the tough economic circumstances much of their fan base finds themselves in today when discussing pricing. They had the president of Nintendo of America in front of them, and how do they mention $80 games? They asked if Nintendo predicted the backlash. "Well, Doug, we all know how those sweaty gamer bros harp on about minor things like prices. Did you consider how the rabble would respond to your enlightened price increases?" Of course, Doug responds with the same sort of soulless corporate speak we've come to expect from Nintendo. Quote, "We look at things such as the content, we look at the extended amount of play that would be provided through the gameplay experience, we look at a number of different factors as we consider what the pricing may be. And so we felt that the price that we charge for Mario Kart World really does equal the value of the gameplay experience." So the same sort of crap about value we've heard from Nintendo already. Their games are just more valuable. Funny how Microsoft, and very soon Sony, suddenly realized that their games are more valuable as well. Thank you, people who pre-ordered a Switch 2. But even this incredibly gentle mention of $80 games was a bridge too far for Doug, because he shuts down that line of questions immediately. Quote, I think anytime you make pricing decisions, there's a level of backlash. But I'd love to focus now on the store. And of course, IGN caves immediately. Quote, okay, yes, understood. Close quote. Oh, we're so sorry for asking about something gamers are actually interested in. Won't happen again, sir. Let's be honest, it barely happened in the first place. Lastly, let's look at how IGN discussed the topic of game keycards. Quote, and there's been big changes to physical and digital game management recently, with virtual game cards and game keycards as we see upcoming on Nintendo Switch 2. Moving forward, is physical still going to be a big part of your business? Or do you see the game keycards, where the actual game isn't on the cartridge, as kind of the future? IGN mentions game keycards as though it's just the march of progress. The industry is simply moving towards digital as part of a natural progression, rather than the reality, which is the industry making intentional decisions to phase out physical media. If IGN cared about integrity, they would ask why these keycards were necessary in the first place. Download codes in a game box already existed, yet Nintendo managed to make an already bad practice worse. Rather than simply downloading the game and playing it from your library, you now have to insert a useless piece of plastic into the console. The only real value that the codes had was the convenience of playing the game straight from your home screen, like any other digital experience. Now, even that little convenience is gone. Game keycards are the worst of both worlds. Yet, IGN doesn't ask about any of this. Or what about the even more obvious question? What will become of people's purchases once the Switch 2 store inevitably goes down? These games won't be available for download indefinitely. Eventually, they'll be gone, and so will the customer's purchases. They'll be left with a useless reminder of a game they can never play. Maybe ask Doug how he thinks it's justifiable to charge full price for what amounts to a glorified rental. And then there's the concern about hard drive space. With game file sizes ballooning over time, there's only so many games consumers can keep on the system. Switch 2 owners will constantly have to delete and re-download games, rather than simply changing out the cartridge, as has been the norm for decades. Surely it's not lost on Nintendo that this might incentivize the purchasing of more external storage. Why not ask about that? And these are just the topics IGN addressed poorly. There's no mention at all in the interview of Nintendo's ongoing patent lawsuit against Palworld, or their war on emulation. No discussion of charging $10 for what amounts to an interactive instruction manual, or the lack of a pack-in game. IGN never asks how Nintendo justifies charging for upgrades for games customers already own, or why they continue to charge full price or more for decade-old re-releases. In other words, this was nothing but a puff piece intended to generate buzz for Nintendo's new store. Of course, we know exactly why IGN didn't ask tough questions. Had they tried, Bowser would have walked off immediately. And IGN would likely have been blacklisted from future interviews or lost out on certain perks like advanced review copies of Nintendo titles. And this is exactly what's wrong with access journalism. It disincentivizes supposed journalists from doing their job. IGN's relationship with Nintendo is simply more valuable to them than their own integrity or the respective gamers, who they mostly hate anyway. So thank you, IGN, for reminding gamers that we don't despise game journalists enough.